The door clicked shut with a heaviness that made my heart stutter in my chest. There's a silence that seeps into a house when you realize it isn't yours anymore. A silence so total it vibrates in your bones. I pressed my palm against the chipped wood of the bedroom door, feeling the cold where the paint had worn away from decades of opening, closing, letting life in. Now it was a wall. On the other side, my son's footsteps faded into the thick hush, each one leaving a mark I'd never wanted to see. I stared at my trembling hands. They looked smaller than I remembered. Fragile. I tried the doorknob, then tried again. It didn't budge. I called out, voice barely more than a rasp, "Derek." But there was no answer. The house was built for family. Every inch held the memory of laughter echoing up the stairwell, of Christmas lights strung along the banister, of long, tired nights spent nursing the sick or rocking a baby to sleep. Now every shadow threatened to swallow me whole. I moved to the window. Outside, the world continued, indifferent. Colorado sky, still sharp with the promise of late winter, hovered over the street, and the wind sent a shudder down the glass. I could just make out the distant lights of George's house, the one person in Boulder I still trusted. But no one was looking up at my window now. It was the kind of pain that radiated outward, making you acutely aware of every heartbeat. The tightness in my chest wasn't just from age or illness. It was something else, something harder, betrayal. In the beginning, you make excuses for your children. You want to believe you didn't raise someone who could lock their own father in a room and walk away. But in that moment, stripped of comfort, I saw it plain. Derek was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I'd worked 40 years as a railroad engineer, raised him in this very house. I taught him to swim, to ride a bike, to tie a tie before prom. I'd buried my wife, Lillian, just 2 years before. I thought I had survived the worst grief a man could face. But I was wrong. Grief has layers. I felt every one of them in the darkness. The floor creaked beneath my feet. I remembered laying these planks myself in '86, Lillian bringing sweet tea and Derek dancing barefoot in sawdust. Those days seemed to flicker now, more dream than memory. I'd become a ghost in my own home, walking the outline of a life that no longer belonged to me. On the dresser, a faded photograph caught the glow from the porch light outside. A family frozen in a time when love was assumed and forgiveness automatic. I wanted to smash it, to erase the evidence that things had ever been different. Instead, I turned away. The walls felt closer. My breaths grew shorter. I could smell the tang of old wood and the hint of Lillian's lavender hand cream still clinging to the curtains. I felt her everywhere, and nowhere. The pain sharpened. I pressed my hand to my chest and tried to steady my breathing. Lillian used to say that love was the thing that kept us alive when nothing else could. But love alone, I realized, couldn't open a locked door, couldn't force a son to care. The sound of laughter floated up from downstairs. Derek and his wife, Ashley, living their lives just beyond my reach. I caught fragments, plans to meet a realtor, a joke about Old Man Miller and retirement homes. I felt the room tilt. My vision went blurry at the edges, like the world itself was receding from me. I staggered to the bed, the comforter rumpled and cold. I'd never been afraid of dying before, but I was afraid of dying like this, alone, erased, rendered invisible by the people I loved most. I don't know how long I lay there, counting the seconds by the tick of the clock, marking each heartbeat like a stubborn act of rebellion. My mind kept circling back to the impossible question. How does a child become capable of cruelty? I wanted to blame the world, the economy, the way grief twists people into shapes you barely recognize. But the truth was simpler and crueler. Some people see kindness as weakness. Some people wait until you're at your lowest, then use that moment to push you over the edge. That was the real wound, the trust that broke, quietly and forever. A draft from the window brought me back. I noticed, for the first time, the old skeleton key hanging from a hook above the nightstand. Lillian's voice echoed in my mind, gentle and sure. "You always keep a way out, Franklin." I reached for it, not daring to hope. It was cold and heavy in my palm, a relic from a time before everything went wrong. I shuffled to the window. My fingers, clumsy with pain, tried the lock. Stuck, then finally gave way. I pushed the glass open, the night air stinging my face, and peered down at the backyard. George's porch light flickered. If I could just get his attention. Every part of my body ached. The room seemed to spin as I gripped the sill, desperate for something, anything, to break the spell of isolation. I remembered teaching Derek how to whistle from this very window, calling him in for dinner after long summer evenings. That memory stung, sharp as a paper cut. I tapped the glass. Once, twice, 3 times. My hand shook so badly I nearly lost my grip. A shape moved in George's yard. A glimmer of hope. Downstairs, I heard the sound of a bottle opening, the television blaring, the sound of a life moving on without me. Rage, red and pure, rushed through my veins. I was not dead yet. I would not give him the satisfaction. I took the blanket from the end of the bed, Lillian's last gift to me, hand-stitched with tiny mountain wildflowers, and waved it out the window like a surrender flag. But there was nothing weak in that motion. I was fighting. I would fight as long as I drew breath. I don't remember the moment I collapsed. I woke to the thud of my own body hitting the floor, the pain in my chest a living thing now, roaring in my ears. Somewhere, the sound of a phone ringing, maybe in my own mind, taunted me. I was trapped. Panic is a strange animal. It chews through logic, turns you feral. I crawled to the door, pounded on it with what little strength I had left. My pleas faded into the wood. I knew in that moment that Derek had planned this, that there was nothing accidental in the way he'd closed me off from the world. I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle in the way of a windfall. A memory flashed through me. Lillian, in her last days, squeezing my hand and whispering, "Don't let them make you small, Frank." I could almost feel her touch, see her bright eyes searching mine for signs of life. She had believed in me even when I no longer believed in myself. I pressed my back against the door and stared at the ceiling, counting each breath. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window, and for a moment it almost sounded like the house was crying with me. It's funny, the things your mind grabs onto at the edge. I remembered my first winter in Colorado, the endless white stretching out forever, the terror and wonder of being somewhere so big and wild. I remembered building this house with my own 2 hands, every board nailed with hope, every room made for love. And now, in this small, locked space, I wondered if any of it had mattered at all. But I wasn't ready to go. Not like this. My body was failing, but my mind, stubborn as ever, refused to surrender. If Derek wanted me gone, he'd have to try harder. If life wanted to break me, it would have to work for it. I closed my eyes and listened, to the wind, to the far-off sound of George's dog barking, to the steady, defiant beat of my own heart. Somewhere beyond the pain and the fear, I felt something else rising. Not just the will to survive, but the need for truth, for justice, for the world to see what happens when love is twisted into cruelty, when a son becomes a stranger and a father becomes a casualty of ambition. I swore then, in the dark, that if I lived to see morning, I would not be silent. I would not let this story end in a locked room with no one watching. I would make sure the world knew what had happened inside these walls, no matter the cost. Memories are a strange thing. Sometimes, when you're locked away and all you have is yourself, they come flooding back, not as comfort but as a sharp reminder of all you've built, and all you stand to lose. I lay there on my back, feeling every beat of my old heart, every ache in my bones, and I let the memories have me. I remembered Boulder the way it was in the early 80s, before the tech companies started buying up every other building, when a man could build a life brick by brick and know it belonged to him. I saw myself as a younger man, sleeves rolled up, calloused hands black with engine grease, my body still strong enough to lift 2x4s without wincing. I could smell the tang of fresh-cut lumber, hear the echo of Derek's laughter out back as he and his mother planted wildflowers along the fence. The house grew around us, each year adding something new. A porch, a new coat of paint, a mailbox with our last names stenciled bold in black letters. I watched myself teaching Derek to fish at Lake Granby, the sun burning the back of my neck, the little boy beside me clutching a rod twice his size. I'd shown him how to tie the knot, how to cast into the deeper water, how patience was the real secret. I thought those lessons would last forever. Even now, when the pain in my chest threatened to swallow me whole, it was the memory of Derek, 6 years old, bright-eyed and so alive, that made my hands shake with longing. I would have given anything to see that boy again, instead of the stranger on the other side of the locked door. I tried to focus on the present, to keep myself from drifting too far. The walls of my room pressed in, heavy with the weight of years. In the corner stood my old recliner, leather cracked and faded, the seat where Lillian used to curl up with a book after dinner. Her quilt, still folded at the foot of my bed, was stitched with tiny bluebirds, every thread a testament to the hours she spent making a home out of nothing. That quilt was more than fabric. It was a map of every night spent talking quietly, planning for the future, making promises we could never quite keep. Downstairs, I heard voices. Ashley's laughter floated up, brittle and rehearsed. Derek's tone was flat, as if he were reading lines from a script he didn't believe. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to catch pieces of their conversation. There was talk of realtors, of offers, of what we'll do with the money. My own life reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet, my house nothing more than a windfall to be cashed in. I felt a bitterness rising, an anger that left a metallic taste in my mouth. They never once said my name. They never once wondered if I was okay. To them, I was a burden, a calculation, not a person. For a moment, I let myself remember a simpler time. Derek and I would pile into my old Chevy truck, a thermos of coffee for me, a can of soda for him, heading up the mountain roads to the train museum. He loved the sound of the engines, the feel of the vibrations under his feet. Back then, he asked questions about everything. He wanted to know how things worked, how to fix what was broken. I was proud of his curiosity, certain that if I just loved him enough, he'd grow up to be a better man than me. Lillian believed in him with a mother's faith, fierce and unyielding. I realize now how much I wanted to believe, too. There's a cruelty in realizing the people you loved have chosen their own comfort over your existence. I listened as Ashley asked Derek about their plans for the weekend. I heard the clink of wine glasses, the casual chatter about things that had nothing to do with me. Their lives had already moved on. My presence in this house was an inconvenience, a line item to be erased as soon as possible. The ache in my chest wasn't just physical anymore. It was the hollow throb of being unwanted, of knowing you're the problem no one wants to solve. As I sat there, the old skeleton key in my hand, I remembered the day Lillian hid it above the nightstand. It was a joke between us. She said every room should have 2 ways out, just in case. I never imagined I'd need it to escape my own son. I weighed the key in my palm, unsure if my hands were steady enough to use it, but it was hope, and hope was something. I looked out the window again, searching for George's porch light. We'd been friends for more than 30 years, sharing beers and stories, helping each other shovel snow in the winter. George was the kind of neighbor who checked in after a storm, who brought over soup when Lillian was sick, who never asked for anything but friendship in return. I needed him now more than ever. I grabbed the quilt and started waving it through the open window, hoping, praying, that someone would see me. The cold air rushed in, burning my face, but I didn't care. I would not go quietly. Suddenly, my mind flashed back to a night long ago, when Derek was a teenager and got caught sneaking out after curfew. I remembered the way his eyes avoided mine, the silent apology he never spoke. Back then, forgiveness was easy. I wanted so badly to believe in his goodness, to believe that love was enough to pull him back from any edge. I wonder now if he ever felt the same way about me, or if, somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other as father and son and became something else entirely. Adversaries, locked in a battle neither of us ever expected to fight. Time in that room became slippery, untrustworthy. I drifted between past and present, unable to tell which pain was worse. The key turned in my fingers, and I tried the window latch again. This time it gave, and the glass slid up with a groan. The night air brought with it the scent of pine and something darker, almost metallic, as if the mountain itself was mourning with me. I leaned out as far as I dared, heart pounding, searching for a sign of life in George's window. Then, from somewhere below, I heard Derek's voice. He was talking to Ashley about selling the house, his tone cold and transactional. There was no mention of me, no concern, no guilt, just a plan. That realization hurt more than anything. It stripped me of any illusions I had left. I saw, finally, that Derek was lost to me, that whatever goodness he once carried had been replaced by something hard and small. I was no longer a father in his eyes. I was just an obstacle. I crawled back from the window, body shaking with effort. I scanned the room for anything I could use, a flashlight, my old radio, anything to signal for help. My mind raced, trying to piece together a plan. I thought about Lillian's letters, hidden in the bottom drawer of the nightstand. Words meant for me in case the loneliness became too much. I pulled them out, read the first line, and felt her presence wrap around me like a shield. She had always been the strong one, the glue that held us together. Now I had to be strong for both of us. In the darkness, every sound became magnified. The tick of the clock, the whisper of the wind, the distant hum of a car passing by. I clung to those sounds, let them anchor me in the present. I was not dead yet. I would not be erased. I pressed the key into my palm, willing myself to believe it could still unlock something. Hope, freedom, maybe even forgiveness. I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow and heavy. I froze, breath caught in my throat. Maybe Derek had changed his mind. Maybe he'd come to check on me, to offer some small act of mercy. But the footsteps faded, and I was alone again. I let the silence settle, thick and unyielding, and I tried to make peace with it. I wondered what would become of me if I didn't make it out. Would they tell people I died peacefully in my sleep? Would they say I was old and frail, that it was just my time? Or would the truth slip out, in whispers and half-truths, until someone finally saw the cracks in their story? I wanted to believe that George would ask questions, that someone would notice the absence of morning greetings, the quiet that fell too quickly. I ran my fingers over Lillian's last letter. She wrote about the future, about how every life has its winter, but spring always comes. I clung to that, even as my body betrayed me. I wasn't ready for my winter to be final. I had one more fight in me, one last story to tell. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and stared into the darkness, daring it to take me. The night thickened around me, every minute stretching into an hour, every second chiseled into memory by fear and anger. The ache in my chest wouldn't let up. Lying on the rug, I watched the strip of moonlight slide across the floor, the shadows of tree branches waving like slow hands. I wondered if this was what it felt like to become invisible. Alive, thinking, but unable to reach anyone. It would be easy, I realized, to surrender. But as I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind latched onto small details, refusing to let go. I remembered the way Lillian used to talk to her plants, whispering encouragement as she watered each leaf. I remembered George's gruff but kind voice, always ready with a joke or a borrowed ladder. In the darkest hour, it was those tiny memories that kept the fear from swallowing me. Somewhere below, I heard the muffled slam of a cabinet, the clink of glasses. Derek's voice floated up, too quiet to make out the words, but I could imagine the conversation. Him talking in that cold, clipped way he had when he thought no one was listening. Ashley's responses, a blend of nervous laughter and thinly veiled annoyance. I could almost see them moving through the kitchen, making plans over a bottle of wine, the future bright for them now that I was no longer part of it. That realization was worse than any pain in my chest. They weren't just indifferent, they were making room for a new life, one that didn't include me. My thoughts twisted with every creak of the house. I imagined the worst, that my body would be found days later, that George would wonder why the porch light hadn't turned on, that no one would ask questions until it was far too late. That fear sparked something new in me, a thin, hot line of anger that refused to let me go. I would not let them win so easily. I pressed the old skeleton key into my palm, willing myself to keep fighting. I gathered what little strength I had and crawled to the window, the blanket dragging behind me. My fingers shook as I tried to open the latch, but at last it slid free. Cold air rushed in, stinging my face, waking me up just enough to remember what mattered. I scanned the backyard, desperate for any sign of George. The porch light was still on, a small promise against the dark. I took the blanket, waved it wildly, and knocked the metal edge of the flashlight against the window frame, hoping the sound would carry. For a minute, nothing happened. Then, finally, I saw a shadow shift. George's silhouette appeared in his doorway, pausing as if listening to something only he could hear. Hope is a dangerous thing when you're desperate. I leaned further out, willing him to see me, to recognize the urgency. It felt ridiculous, waving a quilt like some stranded castaway, but I kept going. My heart pounded. Then, as if in answer, George lifted a hand and pointed at his own eyes. His old way of saying, "I see you." I felt relief crash over me, mingled with the ache of having to ask for help at all. George stepped back inside, the porch light flickering twice. It was our old signal, used on snowy nights when one of us needed a hand. I collapsed back onto the floor, hope warring with fear. Would he call? Would he come over? Did he even realize how serious this was? The answer arrived sooner than I expected. In the quiet that followed, I heard sirens in the distance. They cut through the night, growing louder, their wail sending Ashley's voice into a higher pitch. There was the sound of Derek running through the hallway, quick footsteps on the stairs. For the first time in hours, I felt something close to satisfaction. The game had changed. The commotion outside my door was frantic and sudden. Derek jiggled the doorknob, his voice laced with false concern, asking if I was okay. The lie in his tone stung. I pressed my hand to my chest, breathing slow, determined not to let him see how much it hurt. I let the seconds drag out, listening to the hurried conversation downstairs as Ashley called out for Derek to just act normal. I heard the front door open, boots on the porch, voices announcing themselves, EMTs, police. George was out there too. I could hear his low, steady voice describing what he'd seen. Everything that happened next seemed to move in slow motion. Derek greeted the paramedics at the door, his tone all politeness and worry. He tried to explain that I was confused, maybe having a bad night, that it was just a misunderstanding. I could picture him smoothing his hair, rehearsing the role of the dutiful son. For a split second, I wondered if he believed it himself, or if the mask was all that was left. I pounded on the door with my fist, the pain shooting up my arm. The paramedics heard me, shouted for Derek to open the door, but I knew he hesitated. That hesitation, just a few seconds, said everything. Finally, the door swung open. The paramedics flooded in, and for a moment, the room was nothing but bright lights, urgent hands, and questions asked too quickly to answer. I clung to the sound of George's voice, insisting they check me for injuries, telling them about the locked door, about the blanket in the window. The truth started to unravel Derek's story, thread by thread. The paramedics moved fast, checking my pulse, lifting me onto a stretcher. I watched Derek's face as they carried me out. He looked pale, sweat beading at his hairline, his eyes wide with something between fear and fury. The ride to the hospital was a blur. The pain in my chest had dulled, replaced by a colder, heavier ache. I drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by half-formed dreams of Lillian's voice and Derek's laughter. When I woke, the world was too bright. The hospital ceiling tiles marched overhead, and a nurse's kind face appeared in my line of sight. She asked questions, my name, the date, if I knew where I was. I answered as best I could, holding on to consciousness like it was the last thing keeping me alive. Somewhere outside the room, I heard the echo of Derek's voice, sharp and insistent. He was arguing with someone, maybe a doctor, maybe a cop. It didn't matter. His control was slipping. Alone in the hospital bed, I stared at the 4 in my arm, the steady drip reminding me I was still here. Every muscle in my body ached. I thought about Lillian's letters again, her words about surviving the hard winters, about spring always returning. I realized I had survived the worst, being locked away, forgotten, discarded by my own blood. Now came the harder part, deciding what came next. The thought filled me with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. That evening, As dusk settled over the city, I watched the light fade from the hospital window. The nurse returned, adjusting my blanket, her hands gentle. She said someone had called to check on me, a friend named George, and asked if I needed anything brought from home. I nearly laughed at that. All I wanted was not to return home, not until I'd figured out how to reclaim what was mine. As the machines beeped quietly, I made a promise to myself. I would not let this be the story of how I faded away. I would become the author of my own ending, no matter how much it hurt. Sometime in the night, I heard the soft click of heels. Ashley stepped into the room, her eyes rimmed red. She didn't speak right away. When she did, her voice shook. She apologized for everything, said she never wanted it to go this far. She admitted Derek's plan, his desperation, his resentment. She begged me not to tell the police about her. In that moment, I saw a young woman as trapped as I had been, caught between love and fear, unable to find her own escape. I told her I didn't know what I would do. I told her the truth. When she left, I lay awake for a long time, heart racing with possibility and dread. I wasn't sure if I could forgive or even if I wanted to, but I knew without a doubt that I wasn't finished. I would find a way to make the truth known, to pull back the curtain and let the world see the price of betrayal. I owed it to myself. I owed it to Lillian. And maybe, in some strange way, I owed it to Derek too, to force him to face what he'd become and what he'd lost. The first streaks of dawn slipped across the window, and I let myself hope, for the first time in a long time, that morning would bring something new. After a lifetime of believing forgiveness was the highest virtue, I woke up that morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The world outside my hospital window had turned gray and cold, but my mind was sharp, cold as steel. Every hour in that sterile room had stripped away another layer of sentimentality, until all that remained was purpose. I was done pleading, done explaining, done letting love become an excuse for weakness. My son had left me to die. There was nothing left to salvage except my dignity and whatever sense of justice I could take back for myself. Lying on stiff sheets, I traced the faded veins on the back of my hand, remembering how Lillian used to run her fingers along them, saying they reminded her of the rivers on the old Colorado maps she kept in the kitchen. Those rivers always found their way back to the sea. I wanted that for myself now, to find my own way, even if it meant cutting a new path through rock and ice. My decision formed with a stubborn, cold certainty. I would fight, and I would use every tool left to me. The first call I made was to Rachel Evans, my attorney for 20 years, who had handled everything from parking tickets to Lillian's will. I gave her the barest outline of what happened, the truth but carefully measured. She listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she told me to gather evidence, as much as I could. Documents, hospital reports, recordings. She told me, in a voice that brooked no argument, that people who prey on the weak almost always underestimate what the weak can do when they get desperate. I told her I was far past desperate. The rest of the day, I watched nurses come and go, their faces a blur of sympathy and efficiency. One left a packet of papers on the table, hospital discharge forms, and a brochure about elder abuse resources in Boulder County. I slid the brochure into my pocket, feeling a strange kinship with the other faces in the pamphlet. All of us had believed once that family would protect us. I wasn't alone, and that made me angry and strong in equal measure. After the nurse left, I dialed up a website on my phone, a support group for elder abuse survivors, run by volunteers who called themselves The Last Line. Their stories poured out across the screen. Stories of manipulation, isolation, bank accounts drained and homes stolen, dignity chipped away until it was gone. I read every word, letting their anger feed mine. There was a chat room. I joined, typing my own story with trembling hands. Responses poured in. Some told me not to give up, others shared advice. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I had company in the dark. I began compiling my own evidence. Hospital reports showed clear cardiac distress. The ER nurse wrote down that the door had been locked, and the responding EMTs included statements about possible neglect. The police officer who had responded to George's call left his card on the nightstand, his handwriting neat, Call if you remember anything else. I took photos of everything, stored them in a password-protected file. I wasn't going to let Derek rewrite the story. Not this time. When Rachel arrived that evening, she brought a small tape recorder. "This is legal in Colorado, as long as you're part of the conversation," she said, her tone steady and warm but carrying an undercurrent of resolve. "If you can get him to talk, get him angry, get him to confess, we'll have a case. Not just for civil damages, but for criminal charges." She paused, her eyes softening. "Do you want to do this, Frank? It's not easy." I nodded. There was no question left in me. Rachel sat beside my bed, coaching me through what to say, how to bait Derek into talking, how to keep my own voice steady. She reminded me that sometimes the best revenge is simply to let the guilty speak for themselves. I practiced what I'd say. I wrote it out word for word, then tore up the paper and did it again, until the anger burned clean and I knew I could say what I needed to say. As the plan formed, another idea took root. I remembered Ashley's face, the guilt in her eyes, the way her hands shook when she visited the hospital. There was pain there, and fear, but also a kind of silent plea for forgiveness. She had not stopped Derek, but she hadn't locked the door herself. She was complicit, yes, but maybe not lost. I called her, voice steady, told her I knew everything. I told her what I was planning, that the police would be involved. She started to cry. I listened. Then she surprised me. She offered to help. She said Derek had kept secrets from her too, that she would testify if it came to it, that she couldn't live with herself if she let this slide. I thanked her. I didn't promise forgiveness, but I gave her my trust for the moment. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy is the only friend you have left. The next day I was discharged. The taxi ride home was silent except for the driver's radio, tuned to a classic rock station. Every song seemed to be about leaving, moving on, starting over. When the house came into view, I felt nothing. No sense of homecoming, no relief. It was just a building, stripped of meaning by what had happened inside its walls. Derek was waiting for me. He opened the door with that same rehearsed smile, all concern and apology. "Glad you're home, Dad." I returned his smile with one of my own, sharp, cold, practiced. I let him help me inside, let him fuss with my bags. I kept the tape recorder in my pocket, my thumb resting on the record button. Every moment was a performance, every word a trap. The old man he thought he'd broken was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who'd learned the lesson of survival. That evening, I asked Derek to join me in the living room. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. He sat across from me, all eager concern. I spoke softly, drawing him out, asking questions about the house, about the future, about whether he'd thought of moving somewhere new. It didn't take long for his patience to fray. He grew defensive, then angry. He started talking too much, revealing more than he meant. I kept pushing, prodding at the cracks. The tape recorder caught every word. Ashley came down the stairs, hovering at the edge of the room. I watched her eyes, saw the silent communication between her and Derek, her nervous glances, his cold dismissal. I invited her to sit with us. She did. Derek's temper snapped, and in his anger, he let the truth slip. He admitted locking me in, admitted thinking about the money, the house, his resentment at having to care for me. He didn't see Ashley crying softly beside him, didn't hear Rachel's voice in my head telling me, "Let him go. He'll hang himself." I let him rant, let the poison spill out. Later that night, Ashley knocked on my bedroom door. She handed me her phone. On it were texts from Derek, messages about the plan, about selling the house, about moving to California, once the old man is gone. She told me she'd show the police everything. She told me she was sorry. I believed her, or maybe I just wanted to. I sat on the bed, holding the tape recorder in one hand, Ashley's phone in the other. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of momentum, of the ground shifting beneath Derek's feet. I gathered every document, every piece of evidence, stacked it in a folder. I hid copies with George, who came over the next morning for coffee. I told him everything. He listened, nodding, his eyes bright with something like pride. "Don't let him win, Frank. he said. You've still got fight in you. That night, as I lay in the dark, listening to the quiet of the house, I thought about Lillian, about the way she always knew how to turn the smallest scrap of hope into something solid. I missed her more than I could say, but I felt her strength in me now, guiding me through the labyrinth. I would not let my story end in silence. I would bring it out into the open, let the world see what can happen when love is used as a weapon. I was not a victim. I was a survivor, and I would make sure the truth had the last word. The night before it all ended, I couldn't sleep. I lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling fan as it cut the silence into uneven pieces. In the distance, the city was muted, the hum of Boulder's late summer nights replaced by a tension that pressed itself into every corner of the house. My hands kept returning to the tape recorder, checking the battery, the placement of the microphone, rehearsing the plan over and over. Each detail had to be perfect because the time for hope and for second chances was over. I watched the clock crawl past midnight, then 1, then 2, the house breathing around me. Every creak and sigh a reminder of all the years I had poured into this place. I thought about Lillian and her letters, the way her hope had always seemed indestructible. I tried to borrow a little of that strength for myself. By dawn, the house felt different. I heard Ashley leave early, the car rumbling out of the driveway. Derek was still asleep, or pretending to be. I took my coffee out onto the back porch, letting the cool air clear my head. The mountains looked close enough to touch, washed gold in the morning light. I reminded myself that no matter what happened, I had survived worse. I remembered the fear and humiliation of lying helpless on that bedroom floor, the ache of waiting for help that almost never came. Today, I told myself things would change. Today, I would reclaim the story. Late that afternoon, Derek came home. He tossed his keys on the counter with the careless certainty of someone who believes the world belongs to him. He barely glanced in my direction, but I could feel his eyes flicker over me, searching for weakness. I hid the recorder in the front pocket of my flannel shirt, its weight strangely comforting. I waited until after dinner, the silence between us swelling until it was almost unbearable. Finally, I asked if we could talk. He hesitated, suspicion written across his face, but curiosity got the better of him. We sat in the living room, the late sun slanting through the blinds, dust hanging in the golden air. I started quietly, speaking of the house, of the memories, of how hard it must have been for him to move back after all those years away. He bristled, shrugged off the nostalgia, said it was only temporary. I asked about the future, about where he wanted to go, what he wanted from life. His answers grew shorter, clipped, resentful. The mask of patience began to slip. He accused me of holding him back, of refusing to let go, of making him a prisoner in his own life. I let the words hang in the air, giving him room to fill the silence with his anger. I watched his hands clench and unclench, the way his jaw tightened when I mentioned Lillian. The more he talked, the more careless he became. He started in on the money, how hard it had been to scrape by, how unfair it was that I controlled everything. The bitterness twisted his voice, made him sound younger and smaller than I remembered. He said things I knew were meant to hurt, about how old men shouldn't get to decide the fate of a house when they were already halfway out the door. Each confession landed like a stone, but I kept my voice steady. I told him I understood more than he thought. I told him the difference between inheritance and theft was the line he had crossed. He didn't deny it. He just looked away, eyes shining with a mixture of shame and defiance. Ashley entered the room, standing just behind Derek, her face pale. She clutched her phone, her fingers shaking. I nodded to her, and she held up the screen so Derek could see the messages he'd sent, the evidence she had kept. He went silent, his mouth hanging open, realization dawning too late. He turned on her, demanded to know why she'd betrayed him. She started to cry, saying she couldn't live with the guilt, that what he'd done to me was wrong, that she was afraid of what he might do next. Derek's rage spilled over and he started shouting about the house, about the money, about how everyone always turned against him. He paced the room, his voice rising. The recorder caught every word, every confession, every threat and denial. I let him run out of steam. When he finally collapsed into a chair, breathing hard, I took the tape recorder from my pocket and set it on the coffee table. I told him I was done being silent, that the truth would come out one way or another. His face went white, then red. He reached for the recorder, but I was faster, slipping it into my pocket again. I told him the police were on their way. He laughed, called it a bluff, but there was fear in his eyes. I told him that Ashley had already shared everything with Rachel and the officers who would soon arrive. He swore, punched the wall, and then slumped, defeated. When the doorbell rang, the sound echoed through the house. Derek froze. I stood and opened the door to find 2 police officers and Rachel on the porch. The officers entered, asked calm questions, took notes as I handed over the tape recorder and Ashley's phone. Rachel guided the conversation, ensuring every detail was on the record, every answer documented. Ashley sat on the stairs, tears streaming down her face, but she answered every question, her voice growing steadier with each word. Derek tried to argue, to charm, to blame me, but the evidence was too strong, the story too clear. When the officers finally put him in handcuffs, he stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. I met his gaze, searching for the son I used to know. I saw only a stranger. As they led him away, he shouted that I would regret this, that family was supposed to stick together. I said nothing. The silence was my answer. I closed the door, feeling the weight of it settle in my bones. For a moment, the house was utterly quiet. Ashley sat across from me, her hands trembling in her lap. She whispered that she was sorry, over and over, as if the words could erase what had been done. I told her to take care of herself, to find a way to start over. I didn't have anger left for her, only a deep, aching sadness. Rachel gathered the evidence, promised to keep me updated on the case. Before she left, she told me I'd done the right thing, that sometimes justice is the only way forward. I watched her drive away, the taillights fading into the night. Alone in the house, I wandered from room to room, touching the things that mattered: Lillian's quilt, Derek's childhood baseball glove, the old photo album still stacked on the bookshelf. Each object was a reminder of what I'd built and what I had lost. I realized then that justice, while necessary, didn't always come with satisfaction. Some wounds never fully heal. That night, I sat on the porch as the stars emerged, one by one. George stopped by, a thermos of coffee in hand, and we sat in silence for a while. He didn't ask questions. He just stayed, and in his quiet presence, I found a small measure of peace. I thought about what would come next. Selling the house, moving to a new place, learning how to be alone without being lonely. For the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of hope. Not the naive hope of a man who believed family could fix anything, but the hard-earned hope that comes from surviving what should have broken you. I looked up at the stars, feeling Lillian's presence close by, and allowed myself to believe that even the deepest betrayals could give way to something better. I knew I would carry the scars, but I also knew I would never again be silent. In the days that followed Derek's arrest, the house settled into a hush so deep it seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. The echo of the past was everywhere, woven into the quiet. The scuffed floorboards, the worn patterns in the carpet, the sunlight slanting across the kitchen counter where Lillian used to leave handwritten notes. I moved through the rooms not as a conqueror, but as a survivor, each step heavy with the knowledge that what had happened here could never fully be undone. There were moments I almost expected Derek to walk through the door, his presence as familiar as the ache in my chest. Instead, the silence was filled with questions about forgiveness, about justice, about what happens when the ties of family are pulled so tight they finally snap. In the weeks leading up to the court hearing, I found myself drifting from task to task, trying to reclaim a sense of order from the chaos. Rachel was tireless, guiding me through the legal labyrinth, helping me rewrite my will, cancel credit cards, secure the title to the house in my own name. Every time I signed my name, I remembered how I taught Derek to write his back when learning to form the letters was an act of pride, not pain. Now my signature was a weapon, and every pen stroke was a shield against betrayal. Ashley moved out the day after the police came. She packed quickly, her face gray with guilt and exhaustion, and left a note on the kitchen table thanking me for my mercy and wishing me peace. I read it twice, searching for the woman she'd once been. I wondered if she would ever forgive herself, or if she would carry the weight of what she'd witnessed for the rest of her life. I didn't hate her. I understood too well the cost of fear, the ways people can be bent by circumstance and regret. George checked in every day, bringing groceries or just sitting with me in the evenings, talking about everything but the trial. There was something healing in his presence, a reminder that not every bond was built to break. Some nights we sat in the backyard, a couple of battered lawn chairs turned toward the mountains, letting the silence settle between us like an old quilt. He never asked about the details. He just let me be, which was a kind of kindness I hadn't known I needed. When the trial finally arrived, it felt less like a reckoning and more like a funeral for all the years I'd believed love could fix everything. The courtroom was cold and bright, the air so thin I felt lightheaded. Derek sat at the defendant's table, hands folded, face set in a mask of indifference. He didn't look at me. I spent most of the proceedings studying the grain in the witness stand, letting the lawyers and the judge speak in careful, measured voices about intent and neglect and financial motive. Sometimes the words didn't even sound real, but the recording was real. Ashley's testimony was real. My hospital records, the EMT reports, George's statement, they were all real. Every detail laid out, undeniable, each piece fitting together to reveal the truth I tried so long to deny. I didn't feel triumphant when the verdict was read. There was no satisfaction in watching Derek led away, his shoulders hunched, eyes on the floor. All I felt was a quiet, tired relief, as if a storm had passed and left behind only the ruin and the promise of something new. Later, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Rachel handed me a copy of the final paperwork. She smiled, but her eyes were somber. She told me I'd done the right thing, that justice mattered, even when it cost us more than we ever imagined. When I returned home, the house felt different. Not lighter exactly, but less haunted. I started clearing out the rooms, boxing up Derek's things, sorting through the relics of a life that would never be again. I found one of Lillian's old journals, tucked behind a stack of yellowed cookbooks. I read her neat, looping script late into the night, marveling at the way she'd always found hope, even when life was hard. Her words were a map back to myself, a reminder that grief was not a punishment, but a passage. I sat in the kitchen with the journal in my lap, letting myself grieve, letting myself feel the ache and the emptiness and the strange, flickering promise of something like peace. In the months that followed, I sold the house. I thought the act would hurt, but by then I had made my peace with the letting go. I found an apartment in a quiet building on the edge of town, overlooking a stand of aspens that glowed gold in the autumn sun. I furnished it simply, just the things that mattered, just enough to make it mine. The rest I donated to charity or gave to George, or packed away in boxes for someone else to open someday. The past, I realized, would never really leave me, but I didn't have to carry it everywhere I went. The world outside kept spinning, uncaring, as if my private war had never happened. I discovered small joys, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the warmth of sunlight on my hands, the sound of children playing in the park across the street. I joined a support group for other survivors, men and women who had lost everything and built new lives from the wreckage. We shared our stories in a circle, voices trembling but true, and I found a kind of healing in the telling. I was not alone, not anymore. One afternoon, as winter approached and the first snow threatened the edges of the city, George brought over a letter. It was from Derek. I recognized the handwriting instantly, careful and angular, the same script I'd once praised in a boy learning to write his name. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. For a long moment, I considered throwing it away, unopened. But in the end, I slid it open and read every word. Derek's letter was awkward, stilted, full of the kind of apologies that come too late. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. He wrote about regret, about the fear and anger that had twisted him into someone he didn't recognize. He said he was trying to change, that therapy was hard, that some days he wanted to disappear and never come back. He said he remembered the way I used to carry him on my shoulders, The way Lillian would sing in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. The way hope had once seemed as simple as breathing. He didn't ask me to write back. He just wanted me to know he was sorry. I finished the letter and sat for a long time, hands trembling, the words swimming on the page. I didn't know if I believed him. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive. But I felt a loosening in my chest, a small, soft place where the hurt had started to let go. I placed the letter in Lillian's journal, between 2 pages filled with her handwriting. I decided that forgiveness, if it ever came, would be a slow, gentle thing, more for myself than for Derek. As the days grew shorter, I learned how to live alone without feeling lonely. I found pleasure in routine, in small acts of kindness, to myself, to others, to the world that kept moving on. I volunteered at the community center, taught a young boy how to ride a bike, helped a neighbor fix a broken window. I stopped thinking of myself as a victim, or even as a survivor. I was simply a man living his life, changed but not defeated. On the first day of spring, I walked to the park, the air filled with the promise of new beginnings. I sat on a bench, watching the world wake up around me. Dogs running, children laughing, the snow melting into eager streams. For the first time in years, I felt something like hope bloom inside me. Not the easy hope of youth, but the hard-earned hope of a man who had lost and lost again, and still found reasons to start over. I looked up at the sky, blue and vast, and thought of Lillian, of the life we'd built and the life I'd reclaimed. I whispered a quiet thank you, to her, to George, to everyone who had helped me find my way back. I forgave myself for not saving Derek, for loving too much and not enough, for every choice that brought me here. I let the forgiveness settle, light and true, and then I stood, ready to begin the rest of my life.